It was an age of elegance. For some, champagne flowed like water, fortunes were made and displayed in elegant rooms just like this. But the wealth that built these ballrooms didn't materialize out of nowhere. These captains of industry and finance made fortunes from steel poured in sweltering mills, oil pulled from the earth, railroads constructed with backbreaking manual labor, and fortunes squeezed from competitors who never saw them coming. They called them robber barons to describe how these ruthless men bent markets and people to their will. Yet, we can't ignore the other side of the story. These same tycoons also poured millions into schools, libraries, hospitals, and sometimes they even helped stabilize the government during tumultuous times. So, were they villains or visionaries? In today's episode of Historical Reputations Deserved or Not, we put three of the Gilded Age's most infamous names, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan, on trial. First, let me briefly introduce the Gilded Age so you understand the context. Did you know that Mark Twain, a famous social critic, coined the Gilded Age as a term? Why did he give that name to the time period between the 1870s and 1890s? And why did the term stick? The country enjoyed explosive growth in industry and economics during the decades after the Civil War. That time period also marked rapid political and social changes, and the types of business regulations and employee protections that society enjoys today, almost unheard of, though some voices, like Twain's, called for them. The era's financial and industrial magnates steamrolled over critics and competitors. They amassed fortunes that may have been measured in millions, but would be worth billions in today's money. In those days, people who had money wanted to show it off, to secure their place in society and business. Seen from one perspective, the U.S. looked extremely prosperous. Certainly, massive waves of immigrants came to find the place where streets were paved with gold. However, most were likely to only uncover low wages, awful working conditions, corruption, and social inequality. Sharp-eyed social commentators like Twain saw how the veneer of prosperity masked all of these problems. Naturally, you can't blame the captains of industry for all the chaos, any more than you can credit them for gradual improvements. We can consider their contributions, both for good and ill, and decide if we should think of them as robber barons or as the great men they considered themselves. Let's start with Andrew Carnegie, a name I've heard since I was a young child, even though I was born many decades after he passed away. See, I grew up in a town with a Carnegie library still operating. The library was already old by the time I arrived, so it had served generations by then. Some folks found his origins inspiring too, as he began as a Scottish immigrant, worked as a telegraph operator, and ended up the richest man in the world by leveraging his earnings into investments in oil and steel. However, it's fair to observe that he grew his profits on the backs of exploited workers, terrible working conditions, and near-poverty wages. Andrew Carnegie composed an essay with the title The Gospel of Wealth, which observers like Twain probably found quite ironic. He proposed that letting the wealthy decide how to use their fortunes to improve society was the answer to the great wealth inequality he was quite aware of, and probably did his share to cause. Eventually, Carnegie sold his vertically integrated steel company to J.P. Morgan, who created U.S. Steel. Carnegie took his $480 million, worth several billion dollars today, and began his retirement career as an unparalleled philanthropist for libraries, schools, and other worthy causes. As I mentioned earlier, this legacy lasted for decades. So, did Andrew Carnegie deserve his reputation as a robber baron? Should he be lauded as charitable? Or was he simply complicated? Let everybody know what you think in the comments. It makes these videos a lot more fun when you contribute. Most people today probably still associate the name Rockefeller with wealth. Some people use an expression like, "Does he think he's a Rockefeller, spending all that money on sardines?" Well, maybe it's not exactly like that, but you get the idea. Certainly, Rockefeller's Standard Oil improved its bottom line with outrageously monopolistic tactics, like price fixing, private rebates, and predatory pricing. Like Carnegie, Rockefeller exploited employees with terrible pay, long shifts, and unsafe conditions. At the same time, even his worst critics must admit that his company's innovations and productivity contributed to the country's growth. He also donated generously to education and medicine. Was this later philanthropy enough to redeem him, or not? Some people referred to J.P. Morgan as the banker who owned America. Through banking and U.S. Steel, he certainly controlled a significant portion of the country. Even today, financial institutions still carry his name. Like the others, his companies exploited workers and engaged in predatory business practices. All of these men not only exploited workers, they also violently suppressed protests and other union activities. Accusations of predatory business activities included manipulating the stock market, predatory pricing, and consolidating businesses with aggressive buyouts. He also used his considerable political influence to avoid repercussions for some of his most questionable acts. Yet, Morgan's also credited with salvaging the economy during financial panics. And even though he engaged in monopolistic practices, many pointed out that he improved the efficiency and productivity of these industries. Morgan also generously donated, particularly to the arts and education. So, was J.P. Morgan a financial despot, or somebody who could bring more order to chaos? You get to decide. And I hope you let us know what you think in the comments. Anyway, I had a hard time picking out only 3 Gilded Age robber barons. However, most of them share parallel themes of predatory business practices combined with massive philanthropy. Like Carnegie, maybe most of them either saw it as a way to balance the scales, or at least to launder their public image. I suppose we can also see their legacies in today's billionaires, who engage in philanthropy, or sometimes politics. Hopefully, you'll stick around this channel to see some of our other entries in our Historical Reputations, Deserved or Not playlist. Also, let me know if there's anybody you'd enjoy seeing. I invite your comments and appreciate it when you like or subscribe to this channel.